Here we are in Tucket. Mr. Tucket. We're in chapter 2 and 3. Francis' camp life with the Pawnees began that very morning. The old woman, as it turned out, was the wife of the old man who had been with the hunting party. She tied a rope around his neck and dragged him around the camp like a new puppy. At each lodge, she would stop and call the whole family out. Then she would point at Francis and gabble something he couldn't understand. He guessed that she was bragging about her new son, but he didn't much like what followed. The woman would pinch his arms and push his lips back to look at his teeth, while the children, if there were any at the lodge, came out and kicked him. Francis didn't stand for it at first. When another boy his age kicked him, he kicked right back and landed a fairly good blow. This made all the adults laugh, but his mother shook her head and pulled his neck rope so tight it nearly strangled him. He figured finally that it was easier to play along and let them kick him. For the present, it was enough just to stay alive and learn as much as possible about the Pawnees. He might need the information later to escape, and he would escape if he were sure of it, either alone or with somebody from the train, probably Mr. Ballard, who would come to rescue him. In the meantime, he might as well make it as easy as possible on himself. To this end, he smiled at his new mother. That was his second mistake. Immediately she returned the smile and took the rope off his neck. That much he liked. But before he could get accustomed to the freedom of the movement, 3 young Indian boys jumped him, and he had to fight like a demon just to stay on his feet. It would have been pretty fair if just one of the young Indians had tackled him, but with 3 of them climbing all over him, Francis had no choice but to fight back any way he could, which meant hitting, biting, and kicking. What surprised and angered him most was that none of the elders, not even his mother, made any move to stop the fight. Instead, they just gathered around and cheered. None of them, it seemed, was on Francis's side, and this didn't help him keep his temper. Neither did the fact that he knew he couldn't win against the 3 boys. After the first 5 minutes, he decided that he was going to lose anyway. He might as well do as much damage as possible on the way down. He picked the largest of the Indian boys and went after him. The other 2 might as well not have been there. One jumped on his back and another grabbed at his legs, but it was all too late to save the boy Francis had concentrated on. He was underneath Francis when the other 2 forced him down, and for every blow the 2 boys should have landed, Francis gave the Indian boy under him one on the nose. Even if they killed him for it, he was going to make that boy sorry he'd ever picked a fight. Hoka-ha! Francis didn't hear the yell, but the 2 boys on top of him jumped away. Francis just kept hammering away at the boy beneath him, who had now curled into a ball and covered his head with his arms. Hoka-ha! Came the gruff voice a second time. It is enough. You fight with fists the way a girl fights. Francis felt himself lifted roughly by the back of his belt and dropped in the dirt. Immediately he swung around and attacked the man who had lifted him. He was struck such a blow that it knocked him head over heels. It is enough. I will not say it again. Francis wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He had expected to see a tall or at least a strong-looking man. Instead, he found himself looking at a short, wiry Indian with his hair in one braid. At the bottom of the braid, there was one feather hanging straight down. The man wore plain buckskins, unbeaded moccasins, and carried a rifle in his left hand. It was Francis's rifle. Enough my foot, he said, glaring up at the Indian. They started it, not me. You want to start knocking somebody around? Why not give them a lick or two? And if you're so tough, why do you have to steal rifles from boys? In a sudden hush of the people gathered around the fighting area, Francis watched in horror as the Indian raised the muzzle of the rifle until it pointed dead between his eyes. Bravery in youth is a good thing, the Indian said. He wasn't smiling. It is not good to be stupid, little white-eyed wolf. It is stupid to insult the man who holds your gun. It is stupid to insult your elders. If you do it again, I will kill you. The Indian let the rifle down easily and spun away. Francis watched him go, kneeling there in the dirt. He had never seen such a pure, cold look in a man's eyes, and he knew that he would have to be very careful whenever the one-braided warrior was around. Chapter 3. 3 weeks after he came to the Pawnee camp, Francis learned that the brave who had threatened to kill him and had purchased the rifle for 2 good horses from the old man who had led the party was named Braid. Braid was a war leader. He was not a chief, but any time there was a need for a raid, Braid was the man who led the war party. In camp, he was just another warrior, except that he was so mean that many people feared him. He had the scalps of many victories braided around the doorway to his lodge. He did not dress in finery the way many warriors did because he didn't need to impress anybody. His scalps did that for him. Francis hated Braid more than anything on earth. He watched him lead out a big party of more than 40 warriors. They were gone all that day and through the night until the next morning. When they returned, it was obvious that they had been on a big raid. 4 of the braves were dead, draped across their horses. More were wounded, but even while the women of the dead men sent up their wailing and covered their faces with ashes, the rest of the tribe prepared for dancing and celebration. One of the braves, Francis saw, had a scalp with blonde hair. The party must have made a raid against a group of white people, and the only white people in the area were in his wagon train. It sickened him to realize that Braid had probably used his rifle to shoot at them. Braid sought out Francis immediately upon the return of the raiding party. "They will not be coming for you," the wiry Indian said, smirking. "Not now, not ever. I have given them reason to fear the Pawnees. They will not risk fighting us for one stupid little white eyes." Francis knew he was telling the truth. They would not be coming for him, not because they feared these Indians, but because they would think he was dead. The train would lick its wounds and head on for Oregon without him. He would have to find a way to escape on his own. But Braid wasn't finished yet. The warrior dug into his buckskin, pulled out something, and threw it down in front of Francis. "I brought this for a girl child," he said, "but perhaps you would enjoy playing with it more." Francis stared at the object in the dirt. Only one thing kept him from screaming and attacking Braid, and that was the knowledge that it would do no good. What Braid had thrown down was a small china doll. It was a pretty doll, fashioned after a woman going to a ball. There was only one thing wrong with the doll. Its nose had been broken off. Francis remembered exactly how that had happened. He had been teasing Rebecca, as he did sometimes, and in a fit of anger she had thrown the doll at him. She had missed him, and the doll had hit the corner of the stove, and the nose had broken off. It was his sister's doll, Rebecca's doll. That night, during the dancing and celebration, Francis tried to escape. They caught him not 10 feet from the lodge and tied him up. The next morning, they let him loose, and that evening he tried to get away again. This time, his mother beat him across the backs of his legs with a dried willow cane. So Francis gave up the idea of escaping for a while. They were watching him too closely. After his 3rd week there, a large council meeting was held, and the tribe decided to move the village. Francis had to help dismantle the lodge and load it on the travois in back of the horses. Normally considered woman work, as was gathering wood, but he didn't mind because the work took his mind off the terrible situation he was in. He did mind the direction the band took when they had finished packing, however. Strung in a long line, with much barking of camp dogs, the file headed due northeast, away from the direction of the wagon train. "I'll have to get all the way to Oregon," Francis thought gloomily as he trudged along beside the travois, "before I'll find out about Rebecca. That is, if I find a way to escape." It didn't cheer him either to find that the movement of the tribe, almost 20 miles a day, almost doubled the speed that the wagon train made. They traveled for 10 days and then put up a new camp on the southern edge of the Black Hills, the village winter ground, the place of sweet water and good hunting. Strangely, Francis liked the Black Hills even more than he had liked the Rockies. The Black Hills were not only fine to look at, with their dark ridges and green meadows, but good to live with as well. And it was here that Francis met Mr. Grimes. It happened early one morning. Francis had just finished fetching wood and was bending down over the fire built outside the lodge because the days were still quite warm, when it seemed every dog in camp started barking at once. Francis turned to see what all the noise was about, and there, riding into the middle of the Pawnee camp as though it were the main street of St. Louis, was a white man with only one arm. It was, Francis learned from one of the Indian boys, Mr. Jason Grimes. Well, that was chapter 2 and 3. We'll be back for more tomorrow. Bye.